There is a simple way of integrating virtually any control React component with React Hook form. In the next few videos, we'll learn the steps that we need to follow in order to integrate form field components from popular React libraries. We will start simple with an input and a checkbox, then we look at combo boxes, date pickers, and maybe, based on your suggestions, even more components. We'll handle edge cases too, so we'll take a look at error states, at ways of focusing external components, and much more. So if this sounds like something interesting to you, please consider subscribing and liking this video. It's going to help me a lot. And let's get started. I will quickly walk through the boilerplate project that we're starting with for this exploration. It's a basic Next.js application that we can run as usual. There's a home page that doesn't have much changed. It just has a different background. And there's also Material UI already installed because, folks, I think most of you should be able to install Material UI by yourselves in order to make the most out of this video. So I'm not going to do that. We're going to start with a couple of Material UI components, and then we'll see where we get after that. In the project, I have a form that has absolutely nothing. It's just prepared there for us. There are two pages though, so there's the edit page and the new page for the car sale form that we'll be building, and I went ahead and just hooked everything together so we move a little bit faster. And also there's a car sale API, which is again minimal effort, probably with run status code and so on, because we don't really care about that. We just want to see how we might integrate in different ways with the form. So basically, we will be using the same form for creation and editing of car sales, and we'll see how we can tackle that with the same component and so on and so forth. Before we continue, I want to make a distinction between control components and uncontrolled components. A control component is a component that has some properties that dictate what it renders, and those properties are handled by a parent or ancestor component. So let's say we have a parent component and a drop-down component. If the parent holds inside its state or somewhere in a context or global state or something like, if the parent contains the selected item that needs to be showed in the drop-down and sends it over as props, then we can pretty much say that at least the selected item is a controlled property and that the dropdown is controlled by the parent. So it's a controlled component. Now, this usually comes with a pair, in a pair of properties. So we also have onSelect here as a method, which would call the parent, and we would have a handle select in the parent that handles the change. So the dropdown would ask permission, the parent would decide if it changes state, it would update its internal state inside the parent, and then the dropdown will simply fall in line and basically update itself with the new value. It's an important thing to note that we can also have internal state here. So isOpen can be a state, and we can also have a handle open or toggle inside the dropdown. Just because the internal implementation of the component has some sort of state doesn't actually mean that it's no longer a control component. So we can basically talk about controlled chunks of the component and uncontrolled ones. So by that definition, this dropdown is actually controlled for the value of the selected item, which is actually what we care when it comes to forms. If we have a dropdown or a combo box or something like that, we actually care if the selected item is within our control, not whether or not the dropdown is visible on the screen. Now that we clarified that, we can take a look at the first step of the integration process. We're going to use Material UI components for this. And the first step is to figure out what properties are controllable for the component that we want to integrate. And let's start with the checkbox. So I'm going to look at the docs, and I'm going to, I actually managed to scroll exactly to the controlled part of the documentation. So we usually have some way of finding the control or controlled keyword on the documentation page, and we can see what values and callbacks we can pass on to our component. Now, since we're on the docs, we should also try to figure out two additional things. First, apart from the controlled values, what error values can we show on the element? If it's a text field or text or form related entity, there might be some way of showing errors, and there might be some way of focusing the input or the field. And why is that important? Because React form, or basically any other decent form, will try to focus the first element that is invalid. And in our case, with this checkbox, if it is invalid, we should probably focus it. And that will no longer happen automatically as it did with the register call from the React form that we talked about in the previous video. So let's take a look. Do we have any errors? Yes, we do. So we seem to have errors in a way of an additional form text helper. So we make a note of that. And it doesn't seem like there's a way to focus the checkbox. So I'm going to go into the API and take a look at that and see if the API itself shows us something more. Oh yeah, so here we go. This is probably something you will end up scrolling through. If we find a ref or some sort of link to the HTML representation, or maybe some API call that allows us to focus the checkbox, that is amazing. And it seems we have an input ref right here. So passes the ref to the input, which means if this input is focusable, so it has a tab index or something like that, then we should be able to benefit from the focus functionality of React form as well. Okay, we're done with the first step. We figured out what the control values are. We figured out what additional capabilities we have available. Now it's time to use this component in an isolated environment and make sure that we can control the things that we want to control. So let's identify a piece of code that we can copy paste from the docs ideally, which can be the starting point of our isolated exploration of the component. I'm going to go back to demos and go to checkbox, and let's look at the controlled variant. Let's toggle this on and see what we need. It seems that the control checkbox just needs one state and one handler, and then we pass those to the instance. This is exactly what I was talking about here. So the code that we see into the documentation is actually the parent. Okay, so let's just copy everything that's inside the parent and paste it in our component. Let's use the car sale form for now for the exploration, and just place everything like so. Let's import checkbox from material UI, use the state, and I think we should be good to go. Let's see what we got. Let's go on to sale new, and we have a checkbox. Now that's all fun and good, but we haven't seen error state yet, and we haven't seen if we can focus this entity. So let's clarify how we can show errors first. So if we take a look at this code, oh, we see there's like a form control and form control label. Ah, I see. So a form control label basically adds the clickable label near the checkbox, which is something that we need. And this helper text is what's going to be displayed as either, I think, some informational element or an error message. So let's go ahead and copy the last control label, which contains the checkbox, and see what we can do with that. So I'll try to merge those two together, I think like so. import the form label. And now we should be able to have, yeah, so we should see a label, and we have both of them toggling on. So we have two checkboxes rendered, and they're both using the same state, so that makes sense. Let's remove the last one, and let's take a look at the error. So if I add this form helper text, first of all, I can't really add it like so. I think it needs to live inside a form control. There we go. Or a form group? No, a form control. So let's do that. Form control, properties and whatnot. Let's import it and we're good to go. Let's see what we have. Okay, so we see a message, not necessarily an error. And I think if we set this to error, true, we see the message in red. Okay, we have labels, we have error messages. Now what about focus? I think input ref here, according to the docs, should give us access to the ref. So let's do that. Checkbox ref equals use ref, not reducer. I think it's going to be a checkbox and null, indicating that we allow React to take care of this reference for us. It seems that it's not checkbox, it's actually HTML input element, right? Because this is going to be, yeah, it's an input element. And we pass this along like so. Nothing really happens, but if I press tab, we see that there's a specific indicator for the focused state of the checkbox. So let's see if we can toggle that in a on mount, if you will. Let's set the timeout for maybe 2 seconds, and inside it, let's attempt to focus this entity. Now, if this works, and we can somehow link the referenced checkbox into the React form later on, we have focusing functionality out of the box. And it seems to work. So now we're ready for step 3, bringing in React hook form into our isolated environment and seeing how we can hook the React hook form API with the controlled flow that we already set up. So let's go ahead and do that. I will install React hook form because we don't have it in the boilerplate project, and I will go on to the docs and we will see how we will find the exact same keyword, the controller or controlled value onto the docs. So if I search for control, we'll see that we have integrated control inputs and integrated with UI library, both using something called a controller, which works kind of in the same way as our controlled properties, but instead of us having to build them, React hook form exposes them for us. So I'm going to copy this over for now. Let's see what we get. Let's import that and let's agree to terms. Let's have the checkbox for now. If all values agree to terms, it's false. We're not going to do anything with handle submit just now. Let's just make sure that we can use the controller and the, as you see, the new control. I mean new if you only watched the previous video that I've made, the control API from use form. So we're gonna create a new component from React hook form, right? The controller, and the render method will give us some things which we will probably have to link to the control properties that we already discovered on the checkbox. So I think I'm gonna copy paste this controller completely, like so. And I think I will wrap everything. So the entire package, the error, maybe even the ref that focuses things, everything is going to be inside this controller component. The name is going to be agree to terms, I think. And now TypeScript allows us to continue because control is type safe. And instead of this select, I will add our checkbox. So we're going to take everything that's in here and place it in the return value right here. Now let's see what field gives us. It doesn't show us too much, but if we want to see what it has, we can just replace anything, or any property, and then we see in the drop down after we write the field value what we have available. So we see we have a ref already, which is nice. I think I just want to pass that ref to the input ref of the checkbox. I think the value is going to be whether whether or not the checkbox is toggled on and off, and there's no handle change. It's going to be on change. Oh, and we see that there's also on blur, so we might see if we actually have one on blur on the checkbox, and Material UI seems to implement that as well. So we can do field on blur, and that's pretty much it. We should have all this functionality handled by React Hook Form. And if React Hook Form decides to focus the checkbox because there was an error for it, we are going to have a behavior similar to the focus that we have right here. So we can get rid of that also. Let's see if this still works. I'm going to refresh the page and we can control that value, but it's not clear how we're going to set errors. So let's quickly add a Zod schema, add a simple validation, or maybe just play around with required. I think that would be even faster. So let's just do that. Actually, we cannot say that this field is required anymore because we no longer are using the register API. So I think we need a schema for that. Let's do this. We're going to have a car sale form schema, which is going to be from Zod. So let's import that. So import everything as Zod from Zod. Import Zod resolver from hook form resolvers /Zod. By the way, we talked about this in the previous video. I know it's not really greatly edited, but if you want to check it out, I'm probably going to plug it in somewhere on the screen. Anyway, this is a object, Z object, and it has a agreed to terms, which is of type Boolean. And we're going to have the type car form values. It's not the function, it's just a type. And we will use a resolver here, Zod resolver of the schema, and we should be good to go. I think we can refine this and say that the value needs to be true. So value should be true. And if it is not, we're going to say you must agree to the terms. Let's see what that gives us. Oh, we also need a button, so let's quickly add that. Button type submit. Okay, and I think we also need an on submit with handle submit. Let's do that, and we'll just log the data for now right here. We know we're supposed to send these to the parent and have basically this be like a controlled component from this perspective, from the perspective of the submission. Let's see what we get. We get a very pretty, very pretty button, as you can see. And if we open the console and click it, we don't see any submission happening. But if we check the checkbox, the submission works as expected. So let's see how we can hook up this error to the messages coming from React form. We know we have the form state, which contains errors. And actually, no, wait, so we don't really need the form state right here because we have access to it inside the controller. So let's do that. I think it will be, let's see, what does render accept, field state, and a bunch of others. So let's see if field state is what we need. Is field state error the thing that we're looking for? Yes. All right, so if this object exists, let's see what it is. It's a field error or nothing. So if this value is true, we're gonna show the message as an error. We're gonna place the error right here. And let's take a look. Of course, we have this interesting type error that we are going to ignore for now. So we're only going to show the message if there is an error object, and if not, we're not going to show anything for now. So let's see if this actually works. Let's go onto the page. Let's click the OK button, and now we see the error message properly displayed on the screen. And if we click it, the error goes away, and so on and so forth. Now we're ready for the final step of the integration, which is making sure that values that are coming from the outside the form can be properly set onto the new fields that we're integrating with. So in this case, I would like the checkbox to be initially settable with default values or with controlled values from outside the form. And what I mean by that is I would like to go here on the, no, not on the car sale form, but on the car sale page and have some value, let's say async checkbox value, which will be set. Initially, it will be use state undefined, let's say like that. Let's just add clearly an undefined. So we know we're also working with an undefined value that might become true or false after an API call. Let's pretend we have an API call here. Let's say on mount, something will happen. We will do simulated fetch. So after a certain amount of time, when that pretend fetch finishes the execution, let's say after 1 second, we will set this to true. And use state needs to be a Boolean or nothing, Boolean or undefined, like so. And now we would like to pass the value to the form. So we would like probably to have values, and here accept terms should be whatever that value is. Now let's see how we can define the interface that allows us to accept outside values. So we can say, you know, we're accepting an optional argument of this type, and if the values are provided, we're just gonna pass them over to the values of the form. And I think I can get rid of the default values as well. All right, so this flow will allow us to handle pretty much every situation that I encountered, at least. So fetching data from the server, doing some additional business logic, and then passing it along, doing some additional updates of the data after the initial render, and so on. So default values, not there yet. We're not there yet with them, but with values, we will be able to implement everything we need. It seems I'm using a wrong name here, so I will use agree to terms, like so. And it's complaining that Boolean and undefined are not the same as Boolean, which makes sense. So here we're probably forced to send over a false value if we don't have the data yet. Now I would also like maybe to move this whole thing out of the value assignment. So maybe this would also become a memo. Speaking of callbacks, speaking of memos, somebody was asking in the last video in the comment section, when should we use callbacks and memos? This is probably a good example of, actually this is a very good example for using a memo instead of just passing the object there. So I'm going to say controlled form values equals use memo, and I will return this object. And I will specify that I'm only interested in updating and creating a new object to be sent over when my checkbox value has changed. Now, bear in mind, this might not happen, might not be super relevant, because we're not just getting from a server the value of the checkbox, we're actually getting the same, the whole form data that we will use to initialize things with. But in this case, it's a good example of a use memo, because if we had an additional state here, maybe a counter or something like that, every single time we would render the counter, we would be creating a new value object, and that's not what we are here to do. We do not want to change the values of the form every single time we update some additional state in our parent component. Let's quickly take a look at what values does, just to make sure that everyone understands what this property is meant to be used for in React Hook form, because they actually received an update in the last version. So let's see, values, default values. I think we need to go to the API, use form, and here we'll have values somewhere. Okay, so I'm not really sure how I got lost into the docs, but I remembered seeing this tweet. So let's follow along and see how values are supposed to be used right now. So values will be reactive. Basically, every time we change them, they will update the form. However, if we make changing inside the form, so if we change a value inside the form, we will see that update. So it is somewhere in between a control component and an uncontrolled component. If we quickly jump back into the diagram, if we were to think about the values in React Hook form, so let's say this is the React Hook form component. We have values coming from the parent. They will be updated values here, but we won't have this flow of updating. So values can still change inside the form like so. So we can have a logic that updates values right here, and it works fine like so. So basically, if parent values change, so let's say we have a new value A, we actually get that value inside the React Hook form. So React Hook form value equals A. But then React Hook form values can become B inside React Hook form. And then if parent by some business logic decides to change them to C, React Hook values will become C. So in my opinion, based on the definition that we talked about before, this is not a controlled component. So React Hook form values are not really controlled. They're like partially controlled, and therefore we use this term, reactive. So we know that every single time we send over a new object, we actually update the form. We do not want to send intermediary objects that don't have any updates from the parent, because if they are sent, they will override whatever we have in the form. So if that's not clear, please let me know. I'll probably do a short video on that. There we have it. So in version 7.41, we have this new version of the values. So let's see how this works. Let's see what errors we got, and yeah, let's see if we actually get the new value on the screen, the checkbox, if it updates or not. So we are getting some errors. Let's take a look and let's see how we fix them. So a component is changing a non-control input to be controlled. Great. So this is one of the things that we still need to handle, and it's something that we should always be mindful about. If we want to use a component as a controlled component, so a property of the component is controlled by the parent, it should never be undefined. It should always be something else. So let's go ahead and fix that really quick. Here, the checkbox receives the value that React Hook form has, but currently React Hook form value has absolutely nothing there. So for a brief moment of time, we don't have a controlled checkbox. It's super easy to fix. We can just default to false here as well. And we're actually going to use this pattern of defaulting to some falsy value instead of an undefined in most of the integrations that we'll do. And I think the error will go away now. Perfect. And what do you know, the actual checkbox updates on the screen as a consequence of this simulated API call. So here we are, we're done with the basic stuff. We've seen the 4 steps apparently of integrating material UI components and hopefully other types of components that are controlled into React form. Up next, we're going to take a look at the text field and the autocomplete combo box. The autocomplete combo box being one of those notorious components that a lot of people ask about on Stack Overflow. Hopefully this was useful. If you reached this part of the video, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you haven't liked and subscribed to my channel, please do so. I mean, you're probably gonna enjoy the next videos as well. So yeah, thanks again, and I'll see you next time.